Know what to eat, but find yourself not eating it. Perhaps you've been on diets and off again and just wonder why you can't stick to them. The Eating For You podcast, hosted by me, Sally-Anne Pisk, will show you what's been missing so you can enjoy a healthier way of eating that lasts. Hi, it's Sally-Anne with you, and I'm really excited today to have Jacinta Sherlock with me to celebrate World Mental Health Day. Welcome, Jacinta.
Thanks for having me, Sally-Anne. Very excited and honoured to be here today.
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. I won't say too much now before I do your bio, but of course, one of the things we're going to be discussing is very close to my heart as well. So, Jacinta is an accredited practicing dietitian and credentialed eating disorder dietitian with over 10 years of experience in both public and private mental health settings. Jacinta is the director of Dietetics Done Differently and the convener of the Mental Health Interest Group for Dietitians Australia. Jacinta draws on her learned experience in dietetic practice and lived experience of an eating disorder and diverse mental health experiences to inform the person-centred, trauma-informed approach that she has developed to support people with food and eating. Additionally, Jacinta has completed comprehensive training in motivational interviewing and extensive and ongoing training in acceptance and commitment therapy, providing people with a supportive therapeutic space to share their stories. So, Jacinta, tell us a little bit about why you chose to become a dietitian and then sort of specialise in mental health.
So initially growing up, interested in healthcare and working in healthcare. Yeah. For a while, that was through the lens of nursing, as I had one of my aunties was a nurse. Yes. Going through my own lived experience of an eating disorder during my adolescence and early 20s, shifted that focus to want to use my own experience to then be able to support and help others. And it was very much along the lines of, if I could make a difference in one person's life, then my own experiences wouldn't be for nothing, I guess was my thinking at the time. So that sort of then took me down the path of nutrition and dietetics and dietetic practice to be able to support other people who were navigating eating disorders. Journey into mental health, that having graduated from dietetics, I didn't want to just specialize in eating disorders and didn't want to be just an eating disorder dietitian, which is what took me down the path of working in mental health. And I'm really grateful that I consciously made that decision to sort of diversify my experience and work in that field. And eating disorders are part of mental health, but glad I haven't just been an eating disorder dietitian. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really lovely when we can share our own lived experiences and then combine it with a qualification. And I think this is what becomes a little bit confusing in the nutrition space, because there's so many influencers out there who have had lived experience with different health conditions and including eating disorders. But when it's your own experience, you're not necessarily aware of how that condition or disease can affect other people. So I think it's really important that healthcare practitioners, and we're getting better at speaking up about our own lived experience, because we have in the past been sort of confronted and challenged about, well, how can you understand what I'm going through because you haven't been there? And of course, we can't experience everything in life, but we're very fortunate as healthcare practitioners to intimately know how other people experience life, and especially focusing on eating and eating habits. So I think it's really nice to have that combination, and thanks for sharing that with us today.
My pleasure.
Now, on your website, you describe your approach Actually, I might just read it out. On your website, you describe your approach as the superpower lying in the trauma-informed approach to dietetic practice, interwoven with the training in acceptance and commitment therapy, and the commitment to dismantling oppressive systems through work on collaborative leadership and unified power. There's certainly some very powerful words in there. And to help sort of unpack that, I think, some of our listeners will be aware of acceptance, commitment therapy, and some won't. So maybe if we could start there and explain why you have found this such a positive and valuable tool in your practice to help others.
Yeah. So during my final year at university, received some basic training in motivational interviewing, which for me at the time felt quite unsatisfactory. So I took the initiative to do Tara McGregor's motivational interviewing training, which really gave me a solid foundation in being able to work with people around ambivalence in terms of making change and what's sort of showing up for them. But it also provided the skills and to be able to establish rapport and engage with people. So it's a really good, solid foundational training skill set. What I found though was I was still getting stuck with in terms of working with people and helping people to shift things and change things with their eating patterns and food habits. And I don't like being stuck. So that I stumbled across a training that was provided through public mental health. And that was a taste of ACT. And that must have been in about 2017 or 2018. So a couple of years after graduating. And what really resonated with, I hadn't had any experiences with ACT, but what really resonated for me with ACT was the notion that suffering is a universal human experience. And as humans, we tend to avoid things that are unpleasant and are difficult. And ACT doesn't pathologize human suffering in the way that the DSM does sort of pathologize trauma and human suffering. So that approach really resonated with me on a values-based level and also a philosophical understanding of humans and human condition. And then starting to understand the core processes of ACT, and ACT being a process-based therapy and change being a process, and the different processes that ACT then targets, really just felt like it was something that I wanted to dive deeper into and just keep diving and swimming and exploring. And there's a whole ocean out there and it's just like, let's go.
Yes, and it's about jumping into the right ocean, isn't it? I also have had experience with ACT. I attended a workshop at one of the Dietitian Association conferences, and I suppose what struck me, and part of the reason why I suppose I didn't pursue further qualifications in ACT, was that it was so aligned in many ways with Buddhist philosophy around behavior chains and, how thoughts and so forth lead to action. And of course, my practice is very much based on the practice of mindfulness. So it's trying to remove that judgment and sit in the space where you are. But one of the things you touched on, I think, is really important. It can appear as ambivalence to change or that motivation to want to change. But certainly in my practice, I've worked with ladies who've been on and off diets for 50 years, some of them. And it's kind of that sense of defeat and sense of failure as well that, can keep people stuck. And so I think what's really important with your practice and of course with the mindful eating approach as well is that we take a fresh approach. And yes, sure, food's important, nutrition is definitely important, but it's about understanding why we eat the way that we do.
And I think I really sorry, my brain's just pinged. And I think it's just I'm a bit of a yeah when it comes to language, but that language, and I know I used it earlier on. It's just how I've been trained.
That's right.
That ambivalence to change. When I heard you say that, it's not so much ambivalence. I
Mm.
don't believe it's ambivalence around change. I think it's more ambivalence around learning to be with the discomfort that comes with the process to change, because I think people
Mm.
genuinely do want to change and want things to change
Yes.
in their world. I think the language that we have been using around ambivalence to change is a little bit too simplistic around the deeper process of change and what's going on for
Yes.
people, and that's just a fresh thought.
No,
So
and this is what I love
um
about these podcast discussions, because we, even as healthcare practitioners, get
mm,
to sort of relook at things and how we
mm,
explain things as well. Because
mm,
even though we practice in a similar area, the way
mm,
you go about it and the way I go about it is slightly different. But of
mm,
course, what we're trying to achieve for our clients is the same, is that
mm,
confidence and independence
mm,
to eat well and enjoy food
mm,
and get rid
mm,
of that mental load that often
mm,
goes with second guessing emotions, second guessing other triggers, and second guessing, well,
mm,
what really should I eat? So,
mm,
this is what I love about being able to do this. So, one thing that also popped into my head as you were talking, my experience is that not everyone who approaches me, for guidance or to work with me,
mm,
is aware that they even have an emotional or non-hunger eating habit. Do you find
mm.
that as well when people come to you, they're struggling with eating but not
Mm.
quite sure what the block is?
I'd say there's a small percentage of people who might not have the awareness. I'd say majority of people are aware that they do emotionally eat or do comfort eat. I would say the function of food as reward, and that reward mechanism of like, well, I deserve it. I've had a long day. Things are really stressful. I'd say people are less aware of that. So when we can kind of make that link for people, I think what people are less aware of it are the what maybe how often it is happening, how frequently it is happening, and how much it's become how they've learnt to regulate and manage their internal world and their emotions. So it's that repetitive learned behavior that's just being reinforced. And I think the awareness that when we can link what's happened throughout the day to then how they're responding with food and eating different points in the day, that's kind of really where that aha moment can
Yeah,
really drops in. And
that
that's
is
maybe where the surprise not maybe not so much surprise, but that sense, yeah, being able to make sense of why they're doing what they're doing and that being validated and not shamed.
yes.
Yeah.
And I think again, what popped into my mind as you were explaining that was that going back to our dietetic training days, doing
Mm,
the food diaries, the dietetic histories, especially
mm,
the verbal, discussions
mm,
around, what did you eat yesterday or what did you
mm,
normally eat through the week?
mm,
When people are habitually eating to soothe stress or
mm,
discomfort, they're not necessarily aware of that
mm,
eating habit. So it
mm,
makes a lot of sense why there's always been this gap between what
mm,
ends up on the paper as what we've eaten in 24 hours to what we
mm,
actually have eaten in 24 hours. And
mm,
we know obviously energy in, energy out, it's not so straightforward. There's other things going
mm,
on that interplay with how much energy we
mm,
expend and how much energy we
mm,
store. But it does start unpacking why that was there. And I think that was one of my
mm,
first aha moments when I started down the mindful eating approach. And it was really for myself
mm,
as well. I had a
mm,
very disordered background with food as well, didn't realize I was a
mm,
restrictive eater until,
mm,
I had an event in my life when my brother died and I developed a
mm,
very strong comfort eating habit because I was soothing, the grief.
mm,
And it sort of hit me, during, in a positive way, not in a negative way,
mm,
in a conversation with a girlfriend who's also a dietitian, that had been my background, and I was unaware of
mm,
it, because that's
mm,
what you did. There was kind of that
mm,
belief in many ways that I grew up with before I even trained in nutrition and
mm,
dietetics, that you had to restrict food to have a healthy weight.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and of course, now when I talk it through, it just doesn't make sense at all. But of course,
mm,
that's what we're programmed to believe,
mm,
and that's what
mm,
we act from. So yeah, it's a wonderful space to work in, isn't it? And I just love
mm,
hearing the stories from my clients as well.
mm.
What are
Yeah.
some of the misconceptions that you have helped people work through around nutrition and changing eating habits?
As dietitians, we're trained in, and this is something that Tara, I'm quoting Tara McGregor here, is that we're trained in the science of nutrition. And so most people who come to see a dietitian are having generally have some sort of expectation that there's going to be a meal plan so to help them to gain control of their eating.
Mm,
And, Tara, one of the quotes that Tara really said, and it stayed with me, for the last 10 years, is that nutrition is a science, eating is a behavior, and behavior change is hard. And I think also what ACT has taught me to sort of expand on that quote is that all human behavior occurs in a context, has been learnt in contextually, and serves a function.
yeah.
And so when working with people around their food and eating, by understanding the function of eating behavior, but not just the actual act of eating. Our thoughts are verbal behavior, and that's sort of something Louise Hayes, who is a prominent ACT psychologist, speaks about.
Mm,
So by looking at how are people's thoughts, how have they been shaped, how are they also then linked to what they're eating, and then being able to
mm,
work with that from a functional analysis perspective to then make sense of what's going on for this person in front of me, and how has their learning history shaped, how is their capacity to relate to themselves and to other people in their world, and then how are they using food and eating to manage the emotional responses that show up for them, and being able to explain that to people, to then explain this is the process of change to really shift things in the long term and not just kind of continue to put band-aids on things, is probably the biggest misconception. Don't know if
yeah.
it's a misconception or it's just a way that people have been taught to think about the process of change and the messages that are out there, and that, professionally, as dietitians we've put out there as well, and how other healthcare providers have put out there in terms of the simplistic reductionistic approach to change and behavior change.
Yeah, and I think it's really uh, how can I say, it's really a quote that you shared of Tara's that really explains what's going on and why people cannot change. Because
Mm,
I have this saying, we may know what to eat, but we don't
mm,
actually eat it. They're two
mm,
different things. So we can have knowledge about food, and most of my clients would
mm,
know much more about every diet out there and every fad that's gone past because they've been on it. So you're quite right. I think it's that lack of understanding that knowing what to eat is just not enough.
mm,
We actually have
mm,
to understand why we're eating, what's the
mm,
triggers. And in the eating fuel
mm,
approach, I have what's called 9 drivers for eating. And the idea is aligning those drivers so you're
mm,
actually enjoying food and
mm,
eating in a way that you feel confident and in
mm.
control. And of course, when I say control, I don't mean restricted. I mean
No.
just being able to eat until you're physically
Mm,
satisfied,
mm,
to eat for pleasure sometimes and not feel
mm.
bad about it, and
Yeah.
not feel compelled to eat the whole chocolate bar or empty out the biscuit
Mm,
barrel because they'll be in a temptation, for tomorrow. So
mm,
yeah, I think that really does explain it in terms of, yeah, we have nutrition facts and then we have behavior
Mm,
change. And
mm,
they kind of do go together. There's certainly, what I call
mm.
mindful nutrition choices that
Yeah.
help us build our confidence, say, in knowing what physical hunger and satiety is,
Mm,
in terms of, when we eat for our lifestyle to help support people as well.
mm.
Yeah, no, that's a lovely way to sort of talk more about how you start working with people to explain that to them, Jacinta, that yes, it's not just about food, it's about
Mm.
understanding why you're eating. So, how do you then help people change that reliance on food as a soothing mechanism?
Or I think as dietitians, but any healthcare providers, but would probably extend that to also say just humans being there for other humans in the world. I think the three really important skills or traits that we need are empathy, patience, and curiosity.
Yeah,
And supporting people in starting that process of change really comes from dropping into, for me at least, comes from dropping into curiosity about who this person is, what has happened. The quote from Gabor Matt, who's the psychiatrist, it's not about what's wrong with you, but it's about what has happened to you and what has happened in your life. So really dropping into the contextual information around, yeah, what has shaped somebody's interactions and way that they interact with food from, childhood during adolescence into adulthood. And what I've learned is that by holding space in a way that allows for an understanding that is empathic, where people may not have shared these parts of themselves or these aspects of their life experience because of shame, because of, internalized self blame, and internalized judgment. Being able to, yeah, hold that space and supporting people in terms of validating their experiences and why what's happening now makes sense in the context of what has happened
yeah,
in their past, and why the way that they think also makes sense in the context of how their past has shaped what they think now, and how society has also influenced and shaped what they think, and really being able to validate those experiences, and that coming from, and people experiencing that care, compassion, and dare I say, within the context of a professional context, love, and that being, a multidimensional thing, that aspect of people, yeah, really receiving a caring, nurturing, supportive space where those parts of themselves feel are seen and heard and validated is a really, I'd say, a key component of the process of change.
yeah, yeah, because you're quite right. Often our conversations and the topics we cover with our clients, it's the first time
Mm,
they have felt in a safe space to be able to share their story and
mm,
to be really heard and
mm,
understood. And some of the programs I do are small group programs. And what
mm,
adds on to this is that the women that I work with realize that they're not alone.
mm, mm,
Because even though they may have that, oh, I'm going on this diet today, they don't actually talk about the reason why I can't stick to healthier eating is XYZ. They don't
mm,
talk about that. That's kind of what's
mm,
going on below the surface. And so it's
mm,
really reassuring to say, well, actually, there's not something wrong with me. It's
mm,
just this series of events in my life and information that I've learned,
mm,
habits that I've developed is really important. So the other thing that popped into my head as you were talking was that power of the non-judgmental space. And, getting
mm,
feedback from some of my clients is that you're so patient with us. I never
mm,
felt judged, and they
mm,
will talk about it as being a
mm,
milestone to actually realize that what's happening for them is not really Mount Everest. It's just a little blip that they can move through. And it's really lovely to hear. So, talking about your clients overall, what sort of surprises them about the journey? Because I know you were sort of explaining the big picture of what we do, and I just want to reassure our listeners we don't unpack everything in one session. So it's one thing at a time. It's not like we're being overwhelmed with all of these things. And what I find very much from the mindfulness approach, which would be very similar to the ACT, is that often one thing then leads to another naturally, because once we start uncovering one belief or thought about food or a person's self, then it leads to the next thing. So how do your clients start feeling and changing, I suppose, as they move through this journey with you?
It depends on the person. I think your first question was around what are people often surprised by in terms of working with me, and people are generally surprised by having a space where they feel safe enough to be able to experience their emotions in regards to what has happened in the past. That's one common surprise. One of the key changes that initially start happening for people is people just becoming aware and noticing patterns that are playing out in their day-to-day life. So by actually taking the time in a session to make the links of what's happened throughout their day to then what's happening with food and eating, often by the second or third session, people will come back with the language of, oh, I noticed when I was doing this. So like you spoke about that mindfulness aspect of what's happening for them. And even if that doesn't lead to a change initially, just that process of becoming aware, noticing and being more mindful then opens up the space of, okay, I've then got a choice of like, this is what I usually do. I can use some other strategies that I have been taught before or that I'm learning. And in that process of change, the other important parallel process is helping people notice not just what's playing out in terms of what's happened and then how they react and respond with food, but also in the session, what's happening in terms of the sensations that they're aware of in their body. And I'm often, my clients are very familiar with me saying, you know, sensations are the original language of our body. You know, all when we're born, all we have is the sensations that we're aware of in our body. We don't have language, we don't have cognition. So sensations are the key to understanding what's happening for us in our body. And by supporting people in a trauma-informed way to connect back in with the sensations that they're aware of in their body, that can then help them to have the information about what it is that they need to be able to express what they're feeling and experiencing, to actually be able to feel it and not need to push it down with food and eating, to have the trust that they can feel it without becoming overwhelmed. Because quite often, if people haven't had attuned responses early in childhood to big emotional responses, or they've been shamed for it, or they've gotten in trouble for it, or they haven't had a chance to process what has happened for them, we develop different ways of pushing these sensations down because we haven't been able to experience them and have somebody safely help us to reattune within our body. So that process of learning to experience sensations again and come back out of our heads in terms of making food decisions is a big one. And through that process, what I often see is, because then people become more mindful of how they're feeling and how food is making them feel, they're like, oh, that bag of chips didn't leave me feeling so great, or all that cheese didn't leave me feeling so good.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a conscious choice of like, I know I can have the cheese, or I know I can have the chips, but actually the yogurt will leave me feeling better. And that's, like you said, where we've done a bit of the psychoed of, what food contains and how like macronutrients work. And it becomes that combination of people having their experience based on their own experiential data of how food makes them feel,
Mm.
and then can just draw on that wisdom of, actually, when I eat this will make me feel better, and this is a better choice
Yeah,
for me in this situation. But I've got full permission to be able to have that when I want it
that's right.
as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I just was sort of smiling to myself. I may have been smiling on the surface as well. I don't know, because how many times when I help women set up that mindful
Mm,
eating practice, and we look
mm,
at mindful eating from before, during, and after eating, not just the mindful
mm,
experience of eating. And you're quite
mm,
right. I've had so many women come back and say, you know, those shape biscuits that I used to scoff down, when I ate them mindfully, I realized I didn't even like the taste, you know.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it sounds simple, but
Mm,
it isn't that straightforward, because our
mm,
clients need that help to unpack all of that programming to make
mm,
that nourishing choice more natural for them, because
mm,
there can be years and decades of thoughts and
mm,
beliefs around particular foods or needing food to deal with
mm,
discomfort. And I think this is
mm,
what's exciting with the research coming out of mindfulness practice, is that part of the reasons why mindfulness and mindful eating work is that we become
mm,
more comfortable sitting with those uncomfortable emotions. And one of
mm,
my clients says, I can now sit with my big emotions without reaching for
mm,
food. And
mm,
it's like, I suppose, anything when you first start, it seems, like I said before, Mount Everest, but it
mm,
really then becomes much smaller of a problem, because, as you shared,
mm,
we develop strategies,
mm,
to help us with our emotions rather than just reach
mm,
for food. No, thanks for sharing that journey, because also I sort of talk to my clients about that observation of our patterns,
mm,
then that
mm.
connection with them, so we can actually start understanding them. What do you think are the most important things for someone who has an emotional eating habit, or is a bit frustrated about not sticking to healthier eating? What do you think the most important thing is for people to start with?
If somebody presented with frustration in a session, I would be dropping into the curiosity around what that frustration is and what's going on. Because quite often it's, my hypothesis would be, it's likely to be, and I haven't done any training in parts work, but I just use the language because I picked it up from clients. It's likely to be a part of them or a part of their experience that feels like they should be fixed or should be over it or shouldn't be struggling. So it's like those, I'd be curious about like what those shoulds are that are
Yeah.
like and those beliefs that are
Yes.
still driving it. And then I guess it also then kind of tells me that there's some more work to do around kindness towards oneself, or the self-compassion aspect of the work as well. I don't know if that completely answers the question or not.
Yeah, look, I think what sort of always I come back to as well, is that
Mm,
even as a practitioner, our understanding
mm,
of mindfulness, or the approach, that we
mm,
apply to our work to help our clients,
mm,
each time we learn something from our clients as well.
mm,
And
mm,
I really have to say, when I first started, teaching, well, I should say when I
mm,
first adopted it myself and then started teaching
mm,
mindful eating, I didn't realize the power of that curiosity aspect.
Mm,
of
mm,
mindfulness practice. And most people think about mindfulness as doing something with attention, that you're giving
mm,
it its whole focus. But of course, as a transformational tool, it's much deeper than that. And
mm,
it is that curiosity that helps one remove the judgment
mm,
and makes us feel more powerful or able to make
mm,
choices.
mm,
And, just being curious and asking questions, why is it that I do
mm,
this? Or why is it that I feel that? Is this still valid to me? Because a
mm,
lot of the habits we have and the thoughts and beliefs we have about ourselves were established in a much younger version of
mm,
ourselves. And when we can actually pinpoint that and think, well, actually, no, I don't actually even believe that anymore, but
mm,
it's been fueling and driving
mm.
me with these certain actions. Yeah, so I think curiosity is a very common theme
Yes.
that we've uncovered today. And I think the other thing sort of my clients say to me is, yeah, some of them, come across the eating for you approach, they give it a go themselves, but
Mm,
you kind of need the guidance to know where to start so it doesn't again
mm,
become overwhelming or
mm,
you don't have too high expectations. And I think that's
mm.
kind of what you were talking about previously as well, is that there's a disconnect between our expectations and what we're achieving as well
Mm.
can become frustrating.
Yeah,
And of course, all that
absolutely.
negative self talk comes in on
Mm.
top of that as
Yeah.
well.
I think the thing that came to mind, and this feels like a much more aligned answer, and it's often an analogy I will use in a session with a client, is around that notion of expectation and frustration. In the movie Inside Out 2, they've got the sense of self river, which has all the different balls of life experiences that then kind of like shape the belief that go up to create the sense of self.
Mm,
And if we're then creating new experiences that create new beliefs,
mm,
if somebody's had 30, 40, 50 years of experiences and then there's all those balls in that sense of self river, we have to create a lot new more experiences,
mm.
which then create new balls and new beliefs to then shift like what that sense of self is. Like we can never take away those experiences, but how we relate to those experiences,
That's
how
right.
we see those experiences, and the beliefs that are then shaped by those experiences can 100% shift.
That's right. And I think that's a really positive way to put it. We
Mm,
are very much about what we've experienced in life,
mm,
but more importantly, how we perceive what has happened to us in our
mm,
life and how we
mm,
perceive ourselves in
mm,
living life. And I suppose
mm,
it's a little bit like that saying, we all get dealt, a hand of cards, and it's not about the
mm,
cards we receive, it's about how we play those cards.
mm,
So I think that's a really nice way to help people realize, yes, you can't change what's happened to you, you can't
mm,
change the choices that you've made in the past, but
mm,
you can get a better understanding of why it's happened and turn that
mm.
into a positive platform to move forward from. Jacinta, is there anything else that you would like to share about helping people overcome emotional and non-hunger eating?
So I think just the main thing to any dietitians listening to the podcast, and something that I was really encouraged from with a DA training last week, was just that notion of us being a lot more flexible with our approach to dietetic practice and letting go of our agenda and really meeting people where they're at and working with them on their agenda and being able to navigate that journey with them, I think, is a very important skill for us to learn. We can't unlearn what we've been taught, but we can learn different ways of approaching and supporting people in their own journey and their own process. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's good. And for our listeners who are seeking support from healthcare
Mm,
practitioners, just to flip that, is to really think about what you want for your health. Um,
mm,
acknowledge what you've tried before
mm,
and understand that if it hasn't worked, just see it as, well, that didn't work for me. And you know, if a healthcare practitioner then suggests that you do something that you've already tried before, open up and have that conversation about, well, I did try that, and this is the reasons why it didn't work for me. I often coach my clients, you know, to talk to their other healthcare practitioners on these topics, because I know healthcare practitioners are busy and they often time poor, and we can forget it's not that our clients aren't trying, it's just what they've been trying hasn't worked, and it's not their fault. And I think that's really important. And the other thing I do want to throw in as well and make available is that I do have an emotional eating triggers checklist. So if you're listening today and thinking, well, perhaps I'm not totally aware of why I eat or what's driving my eating, I'll make sure the link to that resource is available with this episode's notes. So, Jacinta, once again, it's been lovely to have you here today for World Mental Health Day and to unpack a different approach to transforming emotional eating habits, and most importantly, helping people become happier with who they are. And nutrition has a big role in that, but so does our actual relationship with food and body. So thanks again. And where can our listeners find out more about you?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you on World Mental Health Day. So I can be found, that checklist that you sounds like an amazing resource for people to be able to access as well. But yeah, I can be found at dieteticsdonedifferently.com and Instagram at dieteticsdonedifferently. But yeah, thank you once again for opening up this conversation, and hopefully, I hope that it's been supportive for your listeners as well.
Thanks, Jacinta. I think we need to talk more about it and also encourage our clients to feel more comfortable talking about it, because that is part of the journey, I think, is when we can actually feel comfortable about where we've come from. And we often forget that we don't share our story, and I'm talking more about our clients here, because there still is a little bit of shame or a little bit of, oh, it's only me, it won't help others. But I just know from the small group coaching programs that I facilitate, that understanding that you're not alone, and by just saying to someone, oh, you know, I realize now I used to struggle with food because I had an emotional dependence on it, could just be the breakthrough that your family member or friend needs to actually go and get the right help, rather than jumping into another diet. So I just want to share that as well, because we have to be comfortable doing that, but I just want to put it out there as well. So if you've been listening today and you've enjoyed this episode, please let us know and share the link on your social media pages. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so you don't miss out on future episodes. You have been listening to the Eating For You podcast with Sally Ann Pisk. If a long-term way of healthier eating is of interest to you, then make sure you subscribe to our podcast.